On the evening of June the 9th, 2024, the United States dollar died on the internet. The posts arrived in a flood. A secret 50-year agreement, the one that forced the whole world to buy oil in dollars, had just expired. Saudi Arabia, they said, was finally free. The kingdom would now sell its oil in yuan, in rubles, in anything but the American dollar. This was it, the day the empire's currency began to fall. Charts of the coming collapse went viral. Millions of people shared the news. There was just one problem. The agreement they were describing had never existed. No such treaty was ever signed. Nothing expired on June the 9th. And the date they had chosen so precisely was the anniversary, to the day, of something else entirely. Something most of them had never heard of. To understand how the internet got the dollar so spectacularly wrong, you have to understand the real arrangement, the one that was built in secret, the one that quietly turned a piece of paper, backed by nothing, into the most powerful currency in human history. This is the story of the petrodollar, and of the handshake the public was never meant to see. It is the most important deal you have never heard of. A system so quiet that for 41 years its central fact was hidden from the public. It is the reason a dollar printed in Washington has value in Tokyo, in Lagos, in Berlin. It is the invisible machine humming underneath the entire global economy. And the strange truth is this: the petrodollar really is fragmenting. The dollar really is in a slow decline. But it is happening for reasons the 2024 myth got completely backwards. To see it clearly, we have to go back to a summer night in 1971, when an American president cut his country's money loose from gold. For most of the 20th century, the dollar was as good as gold. Quite literally, under the post-war Bretton Woods system, foreign governments could hand the United States dollars and demand gold in return at a fixed rate. The dollar was trusted because, in the end, it was a claim on metal sitting in a vault. By 1971, that promise was breaking. America was spending on war in Vietnam, on programs at home, and printing more dollars than it had gold to back. Foreign governments noticed. They began lining up to swap their paper for American gold, and the vaults were draining fast. So on August the 15th, 1971, Richard Nixon went on television and ended it. With a single announcement, he suspended the dollar's convertibility into gold. The link that had defined money for a generation was simply cut. The Bretton Woods system was over. In that moment, the dollar became something new, a pure fiat currency backed by nothing but faith in the United States government. And that raised a terrifying question for Washington. If the dollar was no longer a claim on gold, why would the world keep holding it at all? America needed a new reason, fast, for every nation on earth to want its paper. It would find that reason in the desert. The reason arrived disguised as a catastrophe. In October 1973, Egypt and Syria attacked Israel. The United States rushed weapons to the Israelis, and the Arab members of OPEC retaliated with their only weapon, oil. They launched an embargo against America and its allies, and they turned the taps. The price of crude, which had sat around $3 a barrel, quadrupled, past $11 by early 1974. Gas stations ran dry. Lines stretched around the block. The West tipped into stagflation, and an enormous river of money began flowing to a handful of desert kingdoms, more wealth than they could possibly spend. Inside the Nixon administration, this looked like both a threat and an opportunity. In July 1974, the president sent his Treasury Secretary, William Simon, on a secret flight to Jeddah. Simon was not a diplomat. He was a former Salomon Brothers bond trader. By one account, a mean, nasty, tough bond trader who took no BS from anyone. Nixon's instructions were blunt. The deal, he said, had to be done very privately. Failure was not an option. But there were really two arrangements, running on two tracks. The first was public, and it was theater. A month earlier, on June the 8th, 1974, Henry Kissinger and the Saudi Crown Prince had signed something with a grand name, the United States-Saudi Arabian Joint Commission on Economic Cooperation. It promised roads, factories, technical help. It made headlines. And crucially, it said nothing whatsoever about what currency oil should be sold in. The second arrangement was the real one, and it was secret. In Jeddah, Simon pitched King Faisal a quiet bargain. Saudi Arabia would keep pricing its oil in dollars and would funnel its enormous surplus back into United States Treasury bonds. In return, America would sell the kingdom weapons and guarantee its protection. Kissinger had described the strategy with cold precision. The goal, he said, was to maximize their dependence on us. Faisal agreed, but he set one absolute condition. The Saudi purchases of American debt had to remain, in his words, strictly secret. He feared the fury of the Arab world if it learned that Saudi wealth was quietly bankrolling Israel's greatest patron. And so, in December 1974, American officials built him a hidden door, a special add-on arrangement that let Saudi Arabia buy treasury bonds outside the normal public auctions, invisible to Wall Street and to the world. The handshake was never written as a single treaty. It was a quiet understanding, and it would stay hidden for 41 years until a Bloomberg investigation finally pried the Treasury records loose in 2016 and revealed the kingdom had quietly amassed over $100 billion in American debt. So how did this quiet deal end up backing the entire dollar? It helps to separate two gears that people constantly confuse. The first is invoicing. Because the world's oil was priced and sold in dollars, every country that needed to import energy, which is every country, had to hold a permanent stockpile of dollars to pay for it. If Japan wanted Saudi oil, it first had to buy dollars. That created a relentless, structural demand for American currency, no matter how many dollars America printed. The second gear is recycling, the part Simon cared about most. When the kingdom earned its mountain of petrodollars, it lent them straight back to Washington by buying treasury bonds. Faisal's hidden surplus helped fund the American government cheaply through a decade when a broke, inflation-racked America badly needed the money. In the 1970s and 80s, it was that recycling that mattered most. Saudi cash quietly propping up the United States deficit. But over time, the kingdom's surpluses shrank, and today, Saudi Arabia often borrows rather than lends. What endures is the first gear. The simple convention that oil is quoted in dollars still forces the planet to hold them. The deal Simon struck in a Jeddah palace had outgrown its origins and become the floor under the whole system. Which brings us back to the myth. The people panicking on June the 9th, 2024, were not entirely wrong that the dollar is slipping. They were wrong about everything else. There was no 50-year treaty, so nothing could expire. June the 8th was simply the 50th anniversary of that public Toothless Cooperation Commission, the cover story, not the secret deal. Saudi Arabia kept right on pricing its oil in dollars. But here is what the myth missed, because it was staring at the wrong document. The dollar is, slowly, losing its grip. By the IMF's own reserve data, The share of the world's reserves held in dollars has fallen from about 70% in the year 2000 to under 57% today. The real cracks are real. After 2022, the West froze Russia's reserves, and a nervous world saw that dollars could be weaponized. China and Saudi Arabia began talking about selling some oil in yuan. The BRICS nations started building payment systems that route around the dollar entirely. By some estimates, roughly a fifth of oil trade now settles in other currencies. And yet the dollar endures, because its real backing was never just oil. It is the deepest, safest financial markets on earth, a system of law that foreigners trust. More than 80% of all cross-border payments, and a Saudi currency still pegged firmly to the dollar. The petrodollar was only ever one pillar of many. That is the final irony. The system was built in such secrecy that when the public finally went looking for it, 50 years later, they reached for the wrong file and mourned the death of an agreement that had never been alive. The truth was quieter and stranger. A handshake no one was supposed to see had held up the world's money for half a century, and its slow unwinding was happening in plain sight the whole time.